when I went through SERE training. In all branches of the military goes through SERE if you're going to have secret clearance. If you can't make it through SERE, you won't get secret clearance. And the whole thing with the school is to break you. And the whole thing was they wanted you to tell them who you were. Now they knew I was a Navy SEAL. And matter of fact, I was supposed to go through SERE training before I went to Vietnam, but I was in VN language school for 6 months, so I missed it. And then my deployment came out, and I went to Vietnam without going to SERE. Me and Garcia, our radio man, and we came back to the States, and I'd been back for about 5 months, I guess, and I was going through some higher level cadre stuff up in the Quiawaka Mountains, and some specialized training for Navy SEALs. And they found in my billet that I hadn't made it to SERE School. And the CO called me in and he said, Dave, he said, you got to go to SERE School. I said, why? I said, I've already been to Nam. I said, I'm back. He said, you got to have SERE School in your jacket. He said, and you got to pass it. And when I went, there was, I don't know, about a little over 100 people there, Air Force, Army, the Marine. And it was a camp up in Northern California. It was during the winter, frigid. It was cold. It was 10 days. It started off with escape and evasion. I knew how to hide. Me and Garcia were the only two that didn't get caught. Everybody else got caught. And they had they told there was a safety area at the end of the course. And we'd already been, this was our third day when we were doing this, and we hadn't eaten. Because there was nothing to eat in the desert except for prickly pears. And I just said, I'd rather just not eat them. I said, I ain't getting all that little, I mean, if you get all the little prickly things off them, the pear's pretty good, But, and they did give us a black cauldron. It must have been about 3 foot around. It was full of water and had 2 onions in it. And that's what you got to have for a meal, which didn't do any good. Anyway, we had made it to this place, and there was food in the refrigerator. Sandwiches, chips, soda water, and all that. We made it there, and before we can even get to eat, they came in there and captured us, and we didn't get to eat it. That made me so mad. I told him, I said, man, we're supposed to be there. He said, this is a prisoner of war now. You don't get no food. So then they take you off to where they store everybody. You never get to sleep. It was another hell week. I mean, you could go to sleep if you could, but I was in a box that when I went in it, when they would close it down, my head would be touching the top, and it was on a concrete slab that they kept water running on it all the time, so the concrete just stayed wet. It was just a box they closed over you, pitch black, and that's where I stayed for the next 7 days with no clothes. I had a burlap sack. Every 2 or 3 hours, they'd take you out and interrogate you. And you wore a black hood, and it was never taken off. You never got to see anybody. So they'd be interrogating you, and then trying to figure out what you did for the military and all that. And of course, the only thing I'd give them was my military number and my rank. And that would be it. And I'd be sitting there, and next thing you know, you get punched, knocked out of your chair. And they'd pick you up, put you back in the chair. And then they started interrogating you again, and I'd give them my number, and I'd tell them that was right at that time I was in E2, and I told them I swabbed ships. I never did, but then they'd knock you out of the chair again. You never know. That was it. You just never know when it was coming, because they could be there for 45 minutes before they punched you out. And I think there was like 130, and I think there was like 40 of us that made it through it. And they didn't feed you, but if you escaped, they had the same thing. I had a place where there were sandwiches. Garcia escaped 3 times, and he got to eat a sandwich before they would capture him. And then they had a smaller box. After they interrogate you and you don't tell them nothing. They had this inverted box that was about this wide. Your body just barely fit in. You had to go in it upside down, and your head was down, and then they would close the lid and lock it, and that's where you would stay. You couldn't You couldn't move your hand up to you were just locked in that position. And about 3 or 4 hours later, they come by, unlock the box, and say you can get out. Well, you couldn't get out. I mean, the only way you got out of that box is they had to pry you out of it because your legs didn't work, nothing worked. You couldn't push. And every time they would stick me in that box, I'd go, and I was claustrophobic. I said, man. And luckily, it was cold. And I think if it was during summertime, I probably would have freaked out so bad. But it was cold, so that helped out. But I probably went in that box 6 times and keep me in it 3 or 4 hours at a time. And then they would take, when they took you out, they took you back to the interrogation room. And then 2 or 3 times during it, they would have, I don't know what they would have an indoctrination, give all of this stuff, you know, and then they would take you out and interrogate you again. And it was, and then after a while, you forgot why you were there. It's so strange what that type of stuff does to you. I lost track of time. I thought I'd been there for a year. I mean, you know, and then it comes to the day of graduation, I guess you would call it. They muster us out into the yard. Of course, you still ain't never seen nobody, and still got your hood on, and you're standing there, and they have you standing at attention. At first, they said they had this general up on the podium, and then he tells the guards to take the hoods off. And this is the first time he's seen daylight, just blinded, and got the Russian flag up. Then he wants everybody segregated. He wants the Catholics here. There's only about 40 of us, I think. He said the Catholics here, and Protestants, and the Jews, and this, and so everybody's moving over to where they are, and I'm standing there by myself. It's all over with, and he's looking at me and said, well, what religion are you? And I looked at him and I told him, I said, I don't have a religion. I said, I guess I'm an atheist. I mean, I didn't have a religion, but I wasn't I knew there was a God, but I didn't belong to anything. So he said, okay, you stand by yourself. So I'm standing by myself, and it was so emotional. It still sometimes tears me up. All of a sudden, they start playing the Star-Spangled Banner, and they start raising the American flag and lowering the Russian flag. And at that time, they said that we're going to feed you a meal. It's going to be over. So they're all going, a meal? Well, they had these big black cauldrons, and it was oatmeal. I don't eat oatmeal. I mean, you could shoot me. I'm not going to eat the oatmeal. Well, everybody, you know, getting that junk thrown in this cup, and they're just eating it like crazy. And I get up there, and they fill my thing with look at that. I said, I ain't eating this stuff, and I threw it out on the ground. And he got back in his mode. You're gonna eat that? And I said, no, I ain't. I said, I'm not. I said, I'm not eating oatmeal. I ain't eating oatmeal. And they told the guards to grab me and hold me and shove that oatmeal down my mouth. They could not get my mouth open. They tried. I mean, I was getting bruised. They tried. I told them, I said, shoot me. I said, I'm not eating oatmeal. I didn't. I still thought it was still playing war games. You know, I just told them, I said, man, I said, I'm not eating that oatmeal. But they finally let me go, and we all graduated. When I got back to base, I went and see my commander, and I said, man, I said, that's some bad stuff. I said, a lot of these people got kicked out because we'd asked, you know, wait, where all the rest of these guys? They got kicked out. They didn't get kicked out of the military. They just couldn't have secret clearance. And it's like when they send me to Vietnam language school. I said, I don't want to go to no language school. I don't even know how they come across you, how they, you know, because we took tests constantly all the time. And they just said that out of my whole class, that I would be the only one to learn the language. And when I first went to it, I was, because I wasn't going to get to go to Vietnam with my guys that I graduated with. Most of them, once they made it into the teams, 3 or 4 months after that, after we did war games. We played war games all the time. They were gone, and I was still there in language school, learning Vietnamese. And when I get down south, we capture people that were from some other part of Vietnam, and I didn't know a word they were saying. I think they had 7 different dialects, and some of the dialects, even the Vietnamese don't know, it's the way you pitch it. And like I told him, I said, I don't have no squeaky voice. I said, you ever hear Vietnamese? I said, I got a deep voice. He said, well, it shows that you'll be the easiest one to learn it. And I go, man. And I don't hardly remember any of it anymore. I used to speak French. I can't speak it anymore either. So if you don't use it, you do lose it. Got into Navy SEALs. When you go through the boot camp, the instructors choose what you're better for. You're going to go to UDT, or you're going to go into Navy SEALs and go to Vietnam. Now, UDT went to Vietnam also. I had one of my best friends get killed, and he was in UDT. But they went over there to clear mines and so forth, but they would do ops. And they had tripped a booby trap when they was going through the jungle, and they had a 55-gallon drum full of shrapnel hanging up in a tree, and killed him instantly. And he was from Great Lakes and Roger. We were small. Sometimes we would operate just 3 of us. We'd get an op, and we would get our operations from Chuhois. They were Vietnamese that were against the NVA, but at times we had some that played both sides. Because our first 2 ops we went on, we were ambushed. They knew exactly where we were going, and they were there. Now, for a group of 14 guys, and for the Viet Cong, and we would be 5-6 clicks away from our base camp, and for them to know in the jungle where we were exactly going, your guy was playing both sides. So that's another, and that's a lot that a friend of mine, Clint, probably dealt with. It was bad intelligence. They would go on ops. They were waiting for them. And Vietnam, it's not real small, but it's a long area. And for somebody to know where a small little unit is and where they're going to go 6-7 clicks to insert, and there they are waiting for you. So in our first 2 ops, the first op we went on off, our boat got hit with a B-40 rocket. And our coxswain had a heat round from the B-40 rocket, hit him right about here, and just took his arm off. And plus it put the boat dead in the water, because it went through and hit the shaft. And shrapnel went everywhere, but nobody really got hurt except for the coxswain. That heat round, all the shrapnel just went along with it out the back of the boat. And I remember, and he was a guy in his late 50s. He shouldn't even been there, but he was in the Navy and probably been in the Navy for 30 years. And because when the heat round went through, it cauterized him. He wasn't really bleeding. Wasn't squirting out all over the place. And that was my first thing that I seen in Vietnam, was somebody getting wounded. And when he seen it, then he passed out. We had 2 boats, and that was our first op, and we got hit. And of course, the adrenaline's running, and we want revenge. So, and even though we were trained not to do stupid stuff, we had that was our big boat that would hold 14 people. And then we had a smaller boat that only held 7, plus the coxswain. Well, all 14 of us get on that little boat, go kick butt. Well, because this was 2 days later, we made up another op, totally different place in the jungle that we was going to insert. They were there waiting for us, and there was a hooch next to the river, and that's where we were going to insert at. Well, they had 4 guys in this hooch that they weren't supposed to fire. They were supposed to wait for us to get off the boat, because where we were heading, they must have had 50 Viet Cong waiting for us. But the 4 guys in that hooch opened up on us, which was the wrong thing to do. We were loaded. We had twin 60s on the the side I carried an M60. We had two M60s, two Stoners, and then 12 M16 went over under grenade launchers. And when they opened up on us, we just annihilated that hooch. And while we were in that little firefight with them, you could see where we were supposed to be. That made them jump. And the tracers were just going across that rice paddy. It looked like it would have been putting around every square inch. So it was just unbelievable. Well, the coxswain we had a 427 motor on this boat. It was jet propelled. He threw them controls all the way. Well, there was so much weight in the boat, it blew out the boot, and it just dropped in the water. Well, we already annihilated that hooch. There wasn't hardly anything standing on it, but the boat was floating downriver, going deeper into Viet Cong territory, and we told him, he said, you got to turn around and go back. And the current there we was going against the current. Well, the boat would move, but it was just creeping. So well, by the time we had turned the boat around in the river and started going back, where these Viet Cong were, they were coming up to the bank. And we went through another hail of gunfire. And how we didn't get, the boat got riddled, but none of us got hit, not even a scratch. And so that was our beginning taste of Vietnam, and our adrenaline just was always up and running. But after a while, well, and then we knew that the ones that gave us the info, that they were Chua, they were playing both sides, so we got rid of them. And eventually we ended up with 5 Vietnamese that would go on our patrols with us that were good guys, you know. But the other guy, Clint, I guess they always had bad guys. They had, because you can't follow a boat in Vietnam and get to an insertion point because you don't know where anybody's going. You could search anywhere off of the rivers, but if they're waiting for you, bad intel.